Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to tonight's virtual conversation. I'll let everyone settle in for a minute. I see you all virtually joining us. All right, tonight we are celebrating Rolling Warrior, the incredible, sometimes awkward, true story of a rebel girl on wheels who helped spark a revolution by Judith Heumann. And we are thrilled to have Judith's co-author, Kristen Joiner, here for tonight's event, along with journalist and screenwriter Keah Brown. My name is Sarah Hollenbeck. I'm the co-owner of Women and Children First. We're one of the last feminist bookstores left in the United States. I'm a white woman with loose, curly brown hair. It doesn't quite reach my shoulders. Tonight I'm wearing a white t-shirt. We also have with us tonight an ASL interpreter, Rivka Hozinski, and our live captioner is Sally Bennett. I'm also joined by Megan O'Leary, who's going to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Megan O'Leary. I'm the Arts and Culture Coordinator at Access Living, an independent living center in Chicago, Illinois. It does advocacy work for people with disabilities, and it's entirely run by people with disabilities. So we were so excited to partner with Women and Children First Bookstore. We have a really active arts and culture section where we do a lot of disability culture events, so definitely check us out. But very excited. I'm a white cisgender woman with kind of chin length brown hair and dark rimmed glasses. I'm wearing a blue sweater and a gray shirt. My cat Dylan is a white cat with orange spots. He might make an appearance now and then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Megan. We're so excited to have Access Living here as a co-sponsor of tonight's event. Women and Children First is now open after almost a year of being closed. We're open for in-store browsing. We also continue to offer curbside pickup, and we ship anywhere in the United States. For the time being, though, our events will continue to be held virtually. A few housekeeping notes. Be sure to drop your questions for the authors in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. Also, I'll be putting some links in the chat bar, and those will be the links to buy the book, Rolling Warrior, as well as the audiobook. Now on to tonight's event. Kristen Joiner is a writer and activist who tries to tell stories that change how people see the world. Her writing on exclusion, inequality, and social change has been published in Stanford Social Innovation Review, Stuff and other outlets. She lives in New Zealand with her family. Welcome, Kristen. Keah Brown is a journalist, author, and screenwriter. She's the creator of Disabled and Cute. Keah has a BA in journalism from the State University of New York at Fredonia. Her work has appeared in Teen Vogue, Elle, Harper's Bazaar, Marie Claire, and the New York Times, among other publications. Judy Heumann is also joining us. She's an internationally recognized leader in the disability rights independent living movement. She has served on the Clinton and Obama administrations, and she was the World Bank's first advisor on disability and development. Heumann is the author of a memoir, Being Human, and her story was featured in the Netflix documentary Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution. It is such an honor, I just have to say, to be here tonight with all of you to celebrate the Young Reader edition of Judy's acclaimed memoir, Being Human. Judy, you were the first person to introduce me to the idea that I, as a disabled woman, was not the thing that needed to change to fit the world, but that it was the world that needed to change to fit me. and your words continue to be revelations to me. With this book, I'm thrilled that you're reaching a new, younger generation, and hopefully your ideas will become less and less a revelation and more just an accepted reality for everyone. So please join me in welcoming Judy Heumann, Kristen Joiner, and Keah Brown.
Thank you very much. It's really an honor for all of us to be with all of you. Sorry we can't see you all, but we will. I am fantasizing who you are and what you look like. I love Chicago for many reasons. My family are Jewish refugees, and when my mom was 12 and sent out of Germany, she was sent to live with a distant relative that she actually didn't know who lived in Chicago. So she lived in Chicago from when she was 12 until she married my dad at 25, or I'm not exact, somewhere in the mid-20s. And then Marka Bristow, the late wonderful Marka Bristow, who was one of the founders and CEO president for Access Living, was a dear friend, as are many of the people who are over at Access Living. So I think tonight, what we're going to be doing in our discussion, Kristen and I were the ones who wrote this book, and we also have an adult version, which came out first, called Being Human. And then we're joined by the marvelous, wonderful Keah Brown, who I have been in awe of ever since I first met her. I see her as a brave breakthrough woman who really doesn't necessarily disclose like fears and concerns that may be going on as she's advancing, which I totally admire. And her production for her book, which she'll get into talking about a little bit tonight, and all the other work that she's doing, I think is fantastic. So let me please describe myself. I am a 73-year-old white disabled woman. I am in the foyer of our apartment. I'm married. My husband is Jorge Pineda. I am wearing red glasses. I have red earrings, like kind of like teardrops or something. And then I'm wearing a blouse, which is a V-cut neck blouse with a floral print, and it's red and white and purples and blues. And around I have postcards and drawings from my father, and our dining room. Kristen?
Hi, I'm so thrilled to be here with everybody. I'm in New Zealand, actually, joining you from New Zealand. So I'm in winter. So I'm actually wearing a navy sweater turtleneck. I'm a white middle-aged woman. I have blonde, kind of wavy hair that hits my shoulders. And I have our kitchen behind me. So thank you. Keah, do you want to?
Yeah, so I'm Keah. I am a Black woman wearing black and white rimmed glasses. I'm also wearing a black and white striped dress, and behind me is a gray curtain, a cream colored wall, and a saying like half on the wall, like live, laugh, love, something like that. And that's what you're seeing. I'm not wearing any red lip today, but next time.
What's the name of your book?
Oh, yes. The name of my book is The Pretty One. It's available for purchase now if you're into it. It's a collection of essays that covers the gamut of like pop culture, grief, family, love, all those good things.
Very happy you're here. And I'm also going to quickly introduce Jasmine Gallion, who we may get into discuss this a little bit more, but Beacon, which is the company that is the publisher of our book, for the young adult version, decided that they wanted to follow a model that they were using with other young adult versions. which was to have an advisory committee of young adults. And two of those people were from Chicago, and Jasmine is my neighbor, so very easy to bring her in because she's literally across the hall. So I've been asked to start out by reading the prologue of Rolling Warrior, and I will do that. You'll note that the title for the young adult version is different than the adult version, and that was one of the things that the advisory committee engaged with, was the name and the formatting and different titles for chapters, which I think really make this book, one with additional work that was done, something that will hopefully draw young people in. So I'm going to read. The thing to know about me is this: if I'd been born just 10 years earlier and my parents hadn't left Germany when they did, I would have been killed by Nazis. Hitler considered us, quote, life unworthy of life, end quote. If you were a young disabled child in Nazi Germany in the 1930s, the doctors recommended that your parents hand you over to a special children's clinic where you were either starved or poisoned. When the Nazis expanded the program to include older disabled children, the doctors experimented with gassing them. 5,000 disabled kids were used as a means to wrest new innovative ways of killing masses of people. To test, which meant that we were the experiment for a campaign that was responsible for the systemic dehumanization and murder of almost 20 million people. My Jewish grandparents sent my father away from Germany before World War II, when he was 14, to go with his uncle and two brothers in Brooklyn. He never saw his parents again, but in some way he was the lucky one. My mother was only 12 when she was sent away to live with people she'd never met. She never saw her parents again either. I guess that my grandparents on both sides were worried enough about Hitler to send their kids away, but didn't think it was going to get as bad as it did. A lot of people didn't know how bad it was going to get. So you can see why, when I got sick at 1 year old and it became clear that I was never going to walk again, and the doctor told my parents to put me in an institution, my parents were like, no way. Institutionalization was the status quo for people with disabilities when I was a child in 1949. You basically got put into a building, looked after by nurses, and your parents weren't even encouraged to visit you. There were all kinds of bad things happening in the institutions to people with disabilities, which nobody was talking about. It wasn't until I was in my 20s in the 1960s that it came out that disabled people were getting locked up, beaten, starved, and used like guinea pigs for medical experiments. We were considered mentally and physically defective. Disabled children brought stigma to the family. People thought that when someone in your family had a disability, it was because someone had done something wrong. Years later, when people would say that we did change the world, I used to say, all we did was refuse to believe that we were the problem. In order to understand what really happened, though, let me tell you a story about what the world was like then. Before we mobilized our army, took over the San Francisco Federal Building, and faced down the US government. So I'll begin at the beginning. And Kristen is going to help lead this discussion.
So one of the things, that opening really talks about your background, Judy, and Judy and Keah, your different ages, and as a result of what happened with the Section 504 sit-in and the work that Judy and her activists did, you grew up under very different laws, and have very different backgrounds. But so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your backgrounds, but also one thing strikes me as very similar about the two of you. And that's that I've heard you both talk about your childhoods as really pivotal time of happiness and a feeling of acceptance. And that there was for both of you a very specific moment in your childhoods where you got confronted by another child, and that kind of shattered the glass of how you saw yourself. And so I'm wondering if you could just talk, and you've both emerged as great leaders. And so I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about your backgrounds and how you see your early experiences of having contributed to your identity and who you are now.
So, I mean, I think we all are impacted by the environment that we're living in and how people perceive us and how we perceive ourselves as individuals. And for me, you know, one of the issues was I was the only disabled person in my family, and I didn't know other disabled people in my broader family. And in the neighborhood that I lived in, I was the only person who had polio. So I really grew up primarily in a non-disabled community. And it wasn't until I was about 9 years old when I finally was able to start going to school, because my mother had taken me to school when I was 5, and I'd been denied the right to go to the public school because the principal said I was a fire hazard. And there were no laws at that point. No 504, no Americans with Disabilities Act, no Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And so when I received 2.5 hours a week of education for the first 3.5 years of my education, that was something that we didn't have any idea of knowing what was going on in other states. We presumed there wasn't any laws that were out there to protect me. And in some way, well, I knew I was different. It wasn't until this young boy, when my friend Arlene was pushing me around the corner for us to go to the store, and he started asking me if I was sick. It was at that point that I really began to focus on the fact that although I did know that I did things differently, that the outside world really saw me as sick. Keah?
Yeah, I mean, well, I was born in 1991, so a year after, a year after everything. And I think for me, it was really interesting because, like Judy, I grew up mostly in a non-disabled community. You know, I think I had a couple of classmates who were also disabled, but it wasn't like we spoke to each other often or that we were friends. And so for me, it also happened where a boy pointed out that I was disabled, like by making fun of me in a cafeteria. And I had spent my entire life with my twin sister and my family just treating me like I was just like them. You know, if my twin sister got rollerblades or a bike or a scooter, I would also get those things. And I would also just have to find workarounds. So I didn't think of myself as disabled again until it was forced upon me as something that was negative. And I think that the interesting thing about growing up as a disabled person who, thank God, had a parent who wanted to fight for her and treated her like she was everyday, regular, worthy person, it was interesting to go from that to experiencing something different at school when someone made me feel like for the first time disability was something that I had to be ashamed of and had to be concerned about. But I think in terms of where I am now, I feel like I feel better that it happened when I was younger, because if I was just now coming into my own and trying to figure out my place in the world as a disabled person, I think it would have crushed me more and it would have taken me even longer to get out of it. I think being 12 at the time and having this kid make fun of me and really struggling through a lot of, you know, high school as a result, and most of college, it really gave me the chance to realize that how I see myself matters more than how some random person who doesn't understand disability, doesn't want to understand it, and likely never will, who has moved on from this moment like it never happened, I'm sure. How I see myself is much more important than how some random person who is just not interested in learning or interested in any actual conversation with me as a person, that has to matter more than their feelings and what they think of me. I had to really do the deep work of making sure that I was comfortable with myself because I wanted to make sure that when I woke up in the morning, I was excited to do so.
I mean, I think this is a very important part of our discussion. And I think it's also very interesting that Keah was born in 1991. I was born in 1947. And yet, honestly, much of our discussion could be the same. Certainly, as we were saying, there are different laws, right to go to school and those types of things are different. Keah had protections, I didn't, but on a very humanistic way. Keah was experiencing very similar things to what I experienced. And, for me, Keah, and I don't know if you experienced this, but having our books published and doing these kinds of presentations continues to allow me to really reflect on what was happening, not only at that time in my life, but also today. And I feel that, the discrimination that we discuss in our books, and yours, because many people have written in your book, is also a way for people to understand how still today, with all these different laws, how we still have not yet gotten into the bloodstream of America in some way to see who we are as disabled people with visible and invisible disabilities, Black and brown, white and straight and gay and Muslim and Jewish and Christian and all the different configurations. So the ability to really come forth and have discussions like this, and our books being read in middle schools and high schools and universities, I think are very important. I mean, I started meeting other disabled people when I finally started going to segregated classes when I was like 9 years old. That was the first time that I was meeting other disabled people. And if people watch the film Crip Camp, which I hope you do, you'll see that Camp Jeanette, although there were many other camps also. Did you ever go to camp?
No, I didn't. I did like those little day camps where you just go home.
That was it.
Yeah.
I think the overnight camps, and I mean, I went to a day camp once also, and it was valuable. I like the overnight camps because it really allowed us to move into a different level of discussion, which really allowed more reflections on how we saw ourselves, how other people saw us, and how we, when we had the experiences that you and I were just discussing, how did we respond? How did we want to respond? How would we do it differently? How are we doing it differently? And also being able to get support from other friends who had disabilities, by and large, all who had their own stories that were very similar to what we've just discussed.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, like, for me, I didn't create my own little circle in the disability community until I was out of college. I'd say 2016 was when I really began to start to like myself. It was really then that I was like, oh, I also want to be in a community with people who are like me, because there are things that, even my most loved ones who have no idea, what a physical disability is like, there are things that they don't understand that the people in this community do. And I find that for me, I just never wanted to be a part of it until I understood that it was valuable to have that. Until I understood that I was good enough on my own, then I was like, oh, I also want I want to be in community with people who understand, the sort of intricacies of disability. And it does, you're right. I think writing the book for me, writing the pretty one, was really a way for me to apologize to my younger self for, beating her up and tearing her down and asking myself, why are you like this? And sort of being way too hard on my body that was just trying to keep me alive. I think it was a really good way for me to talk about those things, but also just give other people, whether they were disabled or not, a chance to realize that, like, you also deserve to feel good about yourself. You also deserve a chance to live a life that you're proud of. And so that's what I think really writing the book and having it be out in the world and having these discussions has allowed me to take from it and allowed a lot of other people to take it as well.
And I'm sorry that we can't see each other, but Karen Tamley, who's the CEO, president of Access Living, is here, and her daughter Dominica also. And Dominica was one of the young people with disabilities who were a part of the advisory book for Rolling Warrior. So hello, Dominica, I'm so happy that you're here. Kristen, you want to jump in?
Yeah, it strikes me that, this breaking stereotypes that you're talking, you're talking about these stereotypes. And Judy, I've heard you talk about this a lot. And I think I've read this in your writing, Keah, that, of how people see people with disabilities. Judy, you said the boy asked you if you were sick, that people assume that you're not participating in society because you're sick, or, that they have certain ideas. And so, I'm wondering, Judy said something interesting, Keah, before you got on, which was that she feels like you have more self-confidence than than she does. And I think, and Judy, I'll let you.
At that age.
At that age. At that age. And you do talk, you write a lot about the positive self-talk that led to the hashtag disabled and cute, which has a huge following. And I'm just wondering if you could both talk a little bit more about that, how society is basically in many ways creating these barriers. I mean, is not in many ways, but is creating barriers. And one of those barriers is to having that self-confidence, but yet you've broken through.
So I think for me, unlike Keah, who you went to regular schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she went to regular schools, which is why I think it's so important for disabled children to be in schools with non-disabled children. I did not have that experience. As I said, I didn't go to school until I was 9 years old. So it was the middle of my fourth grade experience. And while my friends in my neighborhood and family friends all did not have disabilities, when I started going to school in the fourth grade, all my friends in that school had disabilities. What was good about that is over time, I began, as I was saying a few minutes ago, there and at camp, began to realize that it was really important to have other friends who had disabilities. And it was important because it allowed me to share my story, to learn their stories, and for us to really be able to talk about how we felt being in the non-disabled world because of the stigma. I think for me, I, at a very early age, started working with other disabled people addressing issues of discrimination and disability. Keah's experience was a little bit different, as a disabled young woman in a regular program. And I don't want to speak for you because I can't, but I'm really interested in looking at why you didn't want to be with other disabled people. For me, it was being afraid to be with non-disabled people because it didn't feel comfortable. It's not, I mean, I had friends, as I said, friends and family. To that part of my life, I was the only disabled person, and it was great because they were friends and family. But going beyond that group of people, when I did not have a motorized wheelchair and I had to have people push me, and I felt like people were staring at me, and I was insecure because I was having these discussions on a regular basis with other disabled people about discrimination and how these laws like the Civil Rights Act, legislation on women were moving forward, but we had nothing in the area of disability. So I'm wondering, Keah, for you, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that my desire to be around only non-disabled people had to do with insecurity as well. Except for me, it was the idea of like, oh, you know, sometimes when I see a disabled person, they're pitied or like somebody makes fun of them. I don't want to be a part of that. I want to be the exception to that rule. So I was desperate not to be around disabled people as a child because I was like, oh, well, I'll just be the other. I'll be the person that they make the exception for, that they choose to like and choose to care about. And I think that for me, it was really just trying to grow up and trying my best to fit in because I already knew that I stood out. You know, I would try to like hide my right hand in sleeves. I would try to make sure people don't see me walk away. I would do my best not to even mention the word disability. I mean, that all comes from a place of insecurity and a place of me just trying to feel like I can fit in and that I was worthy of being someone's exception to a really ableist and terrible rule. I think growing up specifically in school systems with non-disabled people sort of, for me, facilitated this idea that like I need to do whatever I can to fit in because the minute that I acknowledge that I'm different, then they won't want to talk to me. They won't care about me. They won't love me. I won't ever have X, Y, and Z thing. You know, it was just sort of this time in my life where I was desperate to feel like I had worth. And I didn't want to try to find it in myself. I wanted to find it in others. And now I'm at a place where I think the reason that I'm so much more self-confident now at 29, almost 30 in September, is that I spent so long being angry and like scared and insecure. And then I did the real work of being like, all right, Keah, let's say these 4 things that we like about ourselves every single day and hope that they stick. And I had to put in real, actual effort to feel like this. And then once I did, I was like, well, I can take on the world. You know, as long as I know that I want to wake up every morning and chase my dreams. And there's really nothing that somebody can say to me, whether it's on the internet or in real life. Like at the end of the day, I have to be happy with who I am. And if it makes other people uncomfortable, that's not my issue, it's theirs.
Yeah, I think I resonate very much to the word scared. And I'm glad you're never scared. I am not as scared as I used to be, but I think I've also learned to deal with my fear of doing certain things. When I became the assistant secretary in the Clinton administration, you know, that job required that you go out and meet people. You go to all these receptions, which I really typically would not have gone to because I really didn't enjoy the thought of going into rooms with anywhere from 50 to a couple of hundred people who were standing up, and the first view that I had was of their butts. And then, you know, you were pretending to try to have a conversation with people when it was really noisy and, you know, it was really difficult. But then I just decided, okay, this is not me. This is the role. I am an assistant secretary. And if I don't participate in these events, it's insulting the position. And it's also making other people feel like I'm afraid to go. So I did kind of hunker in and decide, you know, to do that. And I think that also was very important for me to be able to, you know, basically look at myself in a different way. You know, being able to say, I represent the position, and it was an honor to have the position, and that it was my responsibility to do my job right. And the benefit for me was that I was doing more regularly things that I'd been afraid of. And that really, I think, also enabled me to do things like speak at meetings where I was the only disabled senior person about issues around education policy and trying to get disability into discussions where I knew if I wasn't saying something, it wouldn't be said. So I think we each have learned different things in the course of our life, and for me, I think one of the other issues is the education that I received until high school was really not an education in the segregated classes. And so that really led to a lot of my fears at high school and in university was I'd never taken any tests until I was in high school, like literally, because it was in a grade list class with 8 to 10 people and limited teaching. So I think all of these experiences really have helped produce people like yourself and myself and many others, where we can really understand more clearly what others may be experiencing and really helping to facilitate discussions with other disabled people that can be in a supportive, non-threatening environment. Do you find that that is one of the benefits for you as you are talking about your work with other people?
Yeah, and I think too, I am a naturally nosy person. The reason that I got into journalism is because I like talking to people and figuring out who they are and why. And so even when I was a kid, I was often the one, my sister is so shy, often the one speaking for the both of us, talking about what we need, what we want. I remember one time we did a play together and she froze up and didn't say her line. So I said it for her and then I said my line and then I did like a big like pose at the end. So I've always been a person who enjoys being in front of a crowd of people. Like it's always given me a sort of adrenaline rush. So I think um, being able to do the work of talking to people about the realities of disability and the realities of my lived experience as a Black queer woman and as a disabled person and how they sort of intersect and what they mean to each other has been really important in terms of just giving people a better idea that we're more than just those like exploitive telethons that you used to see on TV at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know. So it's been really nice to be able to not only talk to people about disability, but to be able to reach other disabled people who maybe haven't seen themselves, you know, represented in books and in all these things that we're doing before, and now they're finally being able to see themselves. And that's, I think, one of the biggest, most important things to me is being able to have a disabled person say, hey, I see myself in you and thank you for doing your work. I think that's, you know, one of the biggest hopes and dreams I could have ever asked for. And that's the thing I'm most excited
Yes,
for.
I think being role models. And I'm sure, you know, we mentor people formally and informally. And I think, you know, one of the benefits, you know, that I imagine for you is that, you know, you're a writer and you had English classes and they saw your potential. And I think that's really wonderful because the ability to, like, I didn't write this book myself. I needed to have a Kristen work with me because I don't have the talent to write like you do, but I have the capacity of telling the story, working with Kristen as she was writing and I was editing, on and on. And I guess, Kristen, you know, one thing people want to know is how did this come about and how was it a value? And for me, having Kristen be the person that I wanted to write the book with was, you know, I got an agent, the agent identified people that I could talk with. And I reviewed Kristen's materials. And then, you know, we met. And I think it's fair to say that Kristen doesn't have a disability. I do. Kristen really didn't know that much about disability, but I thought she was both a good writer and that there would be a benefit if we could produce a good book in also talking about the value that can come out of this kind of an experience, learning more about disability. And I learned more about writing and things like that. Kristen, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, you know, for me, I had come from a background of working in human rights and in the NGO sector and in feminism for my whole career. And so when Judy and I met and I realized I didn't know anything about the 504 sit-in or the development of the disability rights movement, I felt like, and Judy asked me when we sat down for lunch on the first day to meet in Washington, DC, she said, basically said, you worked in human rights your whole career, but you've never heard about or really understood the disability rights movement. And I said, that's right. And she said, why? And for me, being able to collaborate and work with Judy on her memoir really ignited this passion in me to really understand why. Why was this such a big gaping hole in my background, someone who should know it? And then why didn't I learn about it in school? Why wasn't Judy as well known as Martin Luther King Jr., Cesar Chavez? So I think that it was a journey of learning and still is for me. In that way. I think we have time for one last question before we go to audience questions. Sorry, Judy, did you want to say something else?
No, Keah, I don't know if you saw this. Your friend from SUNY Fredonia says hello. And I'm sorry, I'll look for her name. I can't, or his name.
Oh, I see it. I see it. Hi. Yeah, we didn't, you started right after.
Oh, Burgundy.
Yeah. You started right after I graduated, but hello, go Blue Devils.
Okay, so Kristen, what's the question?
But so I think, we had a lot of, I guess the last question I'd ask before we go to audience questions is, because Judy and I had so many conversations about why is it that the events of the 5/4 sit-in, which is the longest takeover of a federal building in US history, why is that not in the curriculum? Why is that not taught? Why don't we learn about it in the same way? And so I'm wondering if you want to take a few minutes to talk about both that question and then also, where do you think we go from here? Judy, you've really focused on government and policy change. Keah, you really have focused on representation issues. And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little about the future.
You want to go first, Keah?
So I think I hope that where we go from here is actually seeing disabled stories where they're not based in trauma, and it's not just the idea that like a disabled person can be the lead of something as long as they're like hurting or in pain. Because right now the stories that I want to create are stories where we live to the end of the movies and the TV shows and we get happy endings and we see a world that explores the sort of vastness of disability, that we live in a world where we can turn on the TV or walk into a movie theater or watch something on a streamer where the disabled person goes through things but also wins at the end of the day. And I think in terms of why we don't learn about it in school is because we live in a society where our curriculum for students doesn't seem to view the 504 sit-in and the signing of the ADA and the work that Judy and so many other people have done as being worthy of being told, even though we also live with a school system that initially began to lie to students and say that Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue and discovered all these things, and then we learn in high school that, okay, wait, that's not true. So I do hope that at some point in my lifetime I see these things added into the curriculum, because first of all, if I would have seen that, it would have made me feel less alone as a child with a disability in a world where most of the people in my classroom were also not disabled. They were just, you know, able-bodied kids. It would have been so nice to be able to see like, oh, we do have a history. Oh, this does have a name. Oh, this does matter, which means that I matter. So yeah, I mean, I just really hope that we get to a point where it is taught in schools and it is given the same weight and the same sort of time and attention that we have on other subjects, and also then again that when we look at film and TV, we actually see disabled people being able to be fully realized people who have feelings and emotions and hopes and dreams.
Yeah, and I think slowly there are changes, and I want to underscore slowly, but one of the values
It's so
of,
slow.
yeah, one of the values of our books that we're discussing tonight is that bookstores and others are selling our books and giving legitimacy to these topics through discussions like tonight. And I think also younger non-disabled people are really asking the question, why didn't we know this story? And then are moving on to, and we need to and want to. So they're, slowly challenging the system. And, you do see some states now where they do have a mandatory amount of that teaching of disability rights is something that needs to happen, not necessarily very long, but that it's there. In states like California, they celebrate Ed Roberts Day, and Ed was a California disability rights leader who passed away. I'm hearing more and more that disability studies is slowly moving forward, but disability studies, as an example, is still not at the level where other studies for other groups are occurring. And I think equally importantly, I believe that it's very important that gender studies, queer studies, Black studies, Latin studies, on and on, need to include disability in what they're doing. That disability studies should not be the only place where people learn about disability. So the more educated the population of people are about the importance of these stories, and over the next decades, I'm really hopeful that this subject matter will fit into the discussion around discrimination, racism, ableism, homophobia, on, and that disability will not be something at the edge of the table that's easily swatted away, in part because other constituencies that are fighting for similar things will not allow that to happen. And I think that's one valuable part of what's happened in the disability community. When I was, in my teen years in the 60s, we didn't really know a lot of people who had disabilities outside of the circle of people who had similar disabilities. But one of the values over the decades, and I think the Centers for Independent Living have played a very important part in that role, is really being organizations that are representing disabled people from a broader background in the broadest way possible, including race and gender, et cetera, not just disability. And I think that's a richness. And I really believe that the disability community has a lot that we can not only be learning from ourselves, but teaching others. If we can really create a model, which is a learning model and a supportive model, we were truly fighting for the rights and equity of all disabled people and others, I think that's a very important contribution.
We have some questions here from our attendees. And I think following on what you've both been talking about, this question is a really good one. It says, in a world where world leaders can mock those with disabilities and bully those with disabilities, how do you keep patience and poise to see your message through and not let anger lead you?
I don't.
I don't either. I don't either. Because I find that people always say like, oh, just kill them with kindness. But there are some people in the world who need you to get as angry as you need to get. I think that we live in a world where people too often believe that you just have to be kind to the people who are mean to you. I mean, for me, it's really just reminding myself that There are always going to be people who are rude, who are bullies, who don't want to understand, don't feel like they need to understand. But as long as I believe in my work and the work that I'm doing, and the fact that I deserve a life well lived, then that has to be all that matters, because I can't spend too much time focused on the people who are already trying to tear me down as I move forward, because they're not worth it. And so I find that I'm not often level headed. I don't kill them with kindness. Oftentimes I'll say something snappy back and then I'll keep going. And I don't have it in me to, focus too much on those people. I just try to do the exact opposite and remind other disabled people as well that we're worthy and we don't have to listen to people who don't think as much.
I mean, for me, I presume that you were in part talking about Trump. And I feel that more than ever, I am trying to speak out against what he and others represent. And when we see what's going on right now in states like Texas, where they're banning certain courses and studies occur, I find that reprehensible. And as a Jewish disabled woman, I feel that one of the reasons the Holocaust came about was because of discrimination, and was because, basically this view that you wanted to exterminate people. And when we look at the racism in our country and homophobia, et cetera, that's been here for centuries, saying that you can't learn about it, to me, is the antithesis of what democracy needs to be. And that's why I feel like, maybe at some point in the beginning, I don't know that I ever was like that, but I think really we've got to speak up and out in a way that also allows other people, both within the disability community and more broadly, to understand what it means to be erased. What the terrible things that have been happening, George Floyd, plus. It's really, for me, impossible not to see that we're teaching our children to lie, because they're not learning things that they need to know to be well-informed people and to ensure that these things never occur again. So it's going to be, as someone was saying in Texas, we don't want our kids to be learning this because it could be painful. Well, you know what? It needs to be painful. People need to understand the implications, the outcomes of our actions. And we need not to put it under the rug, because then history continues to repeat itself on television today over and over again. And so the bottom line is I don't ignore it.
Yeah, I don't either. You can't, because to me it's like people say, oh, they don't want it to be painful for the children, but it's painful for the children that are already going through it. Think about the Black and the brown students in school, and they go to school every day and they enter social media and they see somebody die on their timeline every single day, and the video just gets shared millions and millions of times, and people treat Black and brown bodies like they're not people at all, and so it's painful for them. So I think that it's really important for us to call out, like Judy said, call out these things that are happening and make sure that we're using our voices to let people know that this is not okay. Because when you have people in power with the ability to say things like, oh, let's not talk about critical race theory, let's not talk about all these things that were bad, let's not talk about slavery, because it makes people uncomfortable. But the people that are living it and the descendants of those people are in so much pain. So why shouldn't their pain be acknowledged as well?
Yeah, and I think when we look at COVID, we look at the populations of people who were most harmed by it. It is disabled individuals of all ages and all races. And we have to speak about it. We have to be able to acknowledge the fact that we're no longer going to allow these things to happen, like COVID killing all these disabled people who should not be, of all ages, who should not be living in nursing homes, who should be living in the community, who should be getting the supports that they need. And I think these terrible things in certain ways are bringing people together.
So I think that we have time for one last question, and we have one for Judy, and I would actually ask Keah too the same question. If you could now tell a younger Judy when living in Brooklyn and going to Arlene's house, one thing to prepare her for her future, what would it be? And then Keah, it would be really great to hear from you too about that.
Well, first of all, if we're discussing someone who's like 6, 7, 8 years old, I would definitely have a discussion with them, but I would also have a discussion with the parents, because I think, and Keah, I presume that your parents and my parents had similar characteristics. You know, they basically wanted us to succeed, and were kind of, for my parents, you know, learning how to make it up as they went along and not give up. But I think it's very important that parents, not just of disabled children, but parents need to help instill in their children a vision for their future, and allow kids to feel like they believe in them and that they're there to support them. And for me, as a disabled person with younger disabled people, it's really more engaging over time in discussions, because, you know, I found and find that sometimes it's difficult for any of us to speak about something painful. And it may not be something that somebody was saying to you, but it may be being excluded from something. It may be someone not wanting to help you in a way that you need it in order to do something. Who knows what it is, but it's something where a quick discussion isn't going to be as effective as allowing, you know, a young or mid or teenager or adult or senior person to know that, yeah, you can call on me, or you can call on other disabled people, or you may want to get involved in disability groups where you can have these more meaningful discussions. But dealing with discrimination is something that, you know, as Keah has been saying, it's a very painful, destructive action that isn't quickly and easily remedied. I think if I had to say something, it would be, it's important to be strong, and it's important to have people that you can talk to about these experiences, so you don't take them as something personal and legitimate, but you take it for something that it is, which is ableist, racist, whatever it may be, or whatever combinations it is.
I think the thing that I would say to my younger self, I would age her up a little bit, because I think I needed it more in high school than I did as a child, because I was a very carefree child. But I think the thing that I would say to myself is relax. You're going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Because I think for a very long time, I had convinced myself that I just wasn't worthy of a life well lived, that I couldn't possibly be happy like this. And I think it was really just me believing that, you know, I didn't deserve to be happy because I was disabled, and I didn't deserve all these things that I have now. And so I think the thing that I would tell my younger self is relax, it's going to be okay. You're going to complete things that are beyond your wildest dreams. And if you just keep pushing and you just keep trying, you are going to show the world that you're enough. But most importantly, you're going to show yourself that who you are as you are is good enough, just like this. There's no need to change anything. You're doing great, and I love you.
Yeah. And I presume also, you know, when you decided at 16 that it was okay to have other disabled friends,
Yeah.
that's a big deal. Just like I decided I was going to venture forth more into the non-disability community. I mean, both of those things are experiences that many disabled people have. So what would I tell my younger self? Keep those disabled friends, don't let them go. get them, make them, relish them, and then get other friends and really shake up the world. So,
Yeah.
Hmm,
thank you. Sarah, you coming back on?
Hi, everyone. That was such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. I felt so, the conversation resonated so deeply, I think, with many of us on the call. So thank you for spending your evening with us. If you haven't already, please order the book, Rolling Warrior. Please check out Access Living and the amazing work that they are doing here in Chicago. Thank you, Megan, for joining us. And I want to also thank our ASL interpreters, Amy Kisner and Rivka Hozinski, along with our captioner, Sally Bennett. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Keah. Thank you, Kristen. All of
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Keah, it was such an honor to meet you as well. And both Keah's book and Judy and Kristen's book are available from Women and Children First. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you so much.
Good night, everybody.
Night.
Night.